What could make the most expensive weapon system in human history, a marvel of engineering that cost more than the Manhattan Project itself, suddenly fail at the one task it was designed to do? The morning of November 24, 1944, Tokyo. 111 Boeing B-29 Superfortresses crossed the Japanese coastline at 30,000 feet, the altitude where they were invincible, where Japanese fighters gasped for air and anti-aircraft shells fell harmlessly away. The crews inside pressurized cabins, comfortable in shirt sleeves, prepared to deliver precision bombs on the Musashi aircraft engine factory with their vaunted Norden bomb sights, devices so accurate they could reportedly drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 6 miles up. Except the bombs didn't hit the pickle barrel. They didn't hit the factory. Many didn't even hit Tokyo. The bombardiers watched in disbelief as their carefully aimed ordnance sailed past their targets as if guided by invisible hands, scattering across the countryside and splashing harmlessly into the sea. Ground speed indicators showed numbers that made no sense. Planes flying at 250 miles per hour through the air were crawling across the ground at 50. Some bombers, heading directly toward Tokyo, watched the coastline on their radar screens inch closer, hang motionless, then gradually recede. They had negative ground speed, flying backward while moving forward. The Americans had discovered something the Japanese had known about for 2 decades, but published only in Esperanto, an international language almost nobody read. They had encountered the jet stream, a river of air racing west to east at speeds exceeding 250 miles per hour, sometimes hitting 300, and it was about to rewrite everything the United States thought it knew about strategic bombing. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. This is the story of how American ingenuity met an atmospheric phenomenon that rendered the world's most advanced bomber nearly useless, how that collision forced a complete reimagining of warfare itself, and how the solution, when it finally came, would prove far more devastating than anyone had imagined, not because it was more precise, but because precision itself would be abandoned entirely. Today, we're diving into the extraordinary transformation of B-29 tactics over Japan, a tale not of technological triumph, but of technological adaptation, of American pilots and planners who discovered that sometimes the answer isn't flying higher or building better. Sometimes the answer is doing the exact opposite of everything you were trained to do. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress represented the culmination of American aviation engineering in 1944. 4 Wright R-350 engines, each producing 2,200 horsepower, the most powerful piston engines ever mounted on a production aircraft. A pressurized cabin that allowed crews to work in relative comfort at altitudes where the outside temperature dropped to 60 degrees below zero. Remote-controlled gun turrets, directed by an analog computer fire control system. A range of over 3,200 nautical miles, a ceiling above 31,000 feet, and a price tag of $3.7 billion for the program, more than the atomic bomb that 2 of these aircraft would eventually carry. The B-29 wasn't just a bomber. It was a statement of American technological dominance, proof that while Germany and Britain brawled over Europe with their heavy bombers, America could build something that flew higher, farther, and with more devastating potential than anything in the sky. The strategic bombing doctrine behind the B-29 had been refined for more than a decade at the Air Corps Tactical School at Maxwell Field, Alabama. The theory was elegant in its logic. Modern industrial economies depended on complex, interconnected systems. Destroy the right factory, the right power plant, the right transportation hub, and the entire war machine would collapse like a house of cards. High-altitude precision bombing would accomplish this with surgical strikes on military and industrial targets, sparing unnecessary civilian casualties and bringing wars to quicker conclusions. Brigadier General Haywood Hansell, one of the architects of this doctrine, believed deeply in its moral superiority. The idea of killing thousands of civilians in mass fire raids was, he wrote, fundamentally repugnant to American values. Precision was not just tactical efficiency, it was ethical necessity. When the first B-29 seconds deployed to the China-Burma-India theatre in June 1944 under Operation Matterhorn, these principles would be tested against reality. The reality was brutal. B-29 seconds, operating from Chinese bases at Chengdu, faced supply nightmares. Every gallon of fuel, every bomb, every spare part had to be flown over the Himalayas from India. The bombers themselves had to make these supply runs, burning more fuel to deliver fuel. On June 15, 1944, 68 B-29 seconds launched the first B-29 strike against the Japanese home islands, targeting the Imperial Iron and Steel Works at Yawata on Kyushu. 47 reached the target area. Only one bomb struck anywhere near the factory complex. The Americans were dropping their bombs near their targets only 5% of the time. Mechanical failures plagued the bombers. The Wright R-350 engines, pushed to their limits to achieve the performance specifications, overheated catastrophically. Engine fires became terrifyingly common. Crews joked darkly that the B-29 stood for B-29 and you'll never see 30. More bombers were lost to mechanical failure than to Japanese defences. The China bases proved untenable. By January 1945, B-29 operations from China ceased entirely, but by then, the United States had secured a second chance. The Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam seized from Japanese forces in bloody fighting during the summer of 1944. These islands sat approximately 1,500 miles from Tokyo, within the B-29's combat radius. More importantly, they could be supplied by ship, eliminating the logistical nightmare that had crippled operations from China. The United States Navy and Army engineers transformed these tropical islands into massive air bases. Northfield on Guam became one of the largest airfields in the world. Runways were carved from coral and jungle. Taxiways, revetments, fuel storage, ammunition dumps, maintenance facilities sprawled across the landscape. By October 1944, the first B-29 seconds of the 21st Bomber Command arrived under the leadership of Haywood Hansell, the same man who had helped write the doctrine of precision bombing. Hansell intended to prove his theories correct. High-altitude daylight raids against specific military and industrial targets. Formation flying for mutual defense. The Norden bomb sight for pinpoint accuracy. Everything the doctrine prescribed. On November 17, 1944, a single B-29 named Tokyo Rose made a photo reconnaissance flight over Tokyo. 6 days later, November 24th, came the first major B-29 raid from the Marianas. 111 superfortresses, targeting the Musashi aircraft engine plant north of Tokyo. The results were catastrophic, not in damage to Japan, but in the failure of American expectations. The weather over Japan proved far worse than anything encountered in Europe. Layer upon layer of clouds stacked to 30,000 feet or higher obscured targets. The Norden bomb sight, which required visual identification of the target, became useless. But even when the weather cleared, even when bombardiers had perfect visibility, something was terribly wrong. The bombs missed, badly. Planes flying in formation watched their ordnance sail past targets, scattered by forces the crews didn't understand. Ground speeds fluctuated wildly. Fuel consumption skyrocketed as planes fought invisible resistance. What the Americans didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that they were flying directly into one of Earth's most powerful atmospheric phenomena. A Japanese meteorologist named Wasaburo Ooishi had discovered it 2 decades earlier. Between 1923 and 1925, Ooishi conducted nearly 1,300 observations from the Tateno Atmospheric Observatory, tracking high-altitude winds. He discovered a narrow band of extraordinarily fast-moving air racing west to east across Japan at altitudes above 20,000 feet, winds regularly exceeding 100 miles per hour, sometimes reaching 250, 300 miles per hour. Ooishi published his findings in the annual reports of the Tateno Observatory. He wrote them in Esperanto, the artificial international language he championed. Almost nobody outside his small circle read Esperanto. His discovery went unnoticed by the international meteorological community. The phenomenon remained theoretical to Western scientists. German meteorologist Heinrich Seelkopf coined the term Strahlströmung, jet current, in 1939. American pilot Wiley Post noticed that his ground speed sometimes dramatically exceeded his airspeed during high-altitude flights in the 1930s. But nobody understood it systematically. Nobody predicted that American bombers would fly directly into it over Japan at the exact altitudes where the jet stream ran strongest. The B-29 crews discovered it the hard way. Planes heading toward Tokyo would watch their fuel gauges plummet as they fought 200-mile-per-hour headwinds. Navigation became a nightmare. Bombardiers watching through their northern sights saw the crosshairs drift across the target as winds aloft pushed the aircraft sideways. The bombs, released at 30,000 feet, had 6 miles to fall, 6 miles during which the jet stream's winds would catch them, accelerate them, scatter them. By November 1944, American meteorologists on Guam began piecing together observations from B-29 missions. They didn't fully understand what they were seeing, but they recognized the pattern. Winds at altitude over Japan were unlike anything experienced anywhere else, certainly nothing like the conditions over Europe, where American bomber doctrine had been proven. The 21st Bomber Command under Hansel continued high-altitude precision bombing through December and January. The results remained dismal. Mission after mission returned with reconnaissance photos showing minimal damage. Only 20% of the aircraft that took off actually bombed the primary target. 20% failed to bomb any target at all. The pressure mounted. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces, had staked his career and the independence of the future Air Force on proving that strategic bombing could win wars. Arnold had suffered 4 heart attacks during the war. His doctors warned him the stress was killing him, but Arnold wouldn't relent. The B-29 program had cost $3.7 billion. It had to work. It had to prove that air power alone could bring Japan to its knees, that a bloody amphibious invasion with potentially 1 million American casualties could be avoided. Arnold needed results. Hansel couldn't deliver them. In January 1945, Arnold made the decision. Haywood Hansel, the architect of precision bombing doctrine, was relieved of command. His replacement was a 38-year-old major general who had made his reputation not through doctrine but through results. A man who had led B-17 formations over Germany, who had developed innovative tactics on the fly, who understood that winning wars sometimes required abandoning the rules. His name was Curtis Emerson LeMay, and he was about to change everything. LeMay arrived in the Marianas on January 20th, 1945, inheriting a command mired in failure and frustration. The crews were demoralized. The aircraft, despite their technological sophistication, were achieving virtually nothing. Arnold's staff had made the situation crystal clear. One aide told LeMay directly, "If you don't get results, you'll be fired." LeMay understood pressure. Born in Columbus, Ohio, in 1906, he had grown up poor, the son of an itinerant worker who moved from job to job. LeMay had worked his way through Ohio State University, joined the Army Air Corps, and risen through persistence and proven competence. He was not a theorist. He was not an idealist. He was a pragmatist who studied problems until he understood them, then solved them with whatever methods worked, regardless of doctrine. For the first 6 weeks, LeMay continued Hansel's tactics. High-altitude precision bombing. The results remained the same. Abysmal. LeMay analyzed every aspect of the problem. The jet stream made accurate bombing impossible at 30,000 feet. The weather over Japan obscured targets. Japanese air defenses, while not as sophisticated as Germany's, were improving. B-29 losses, while not catastrophic, were steady. But LeMay noticed something else. Intelligence reports on Japanese cities. Most structures weren't stone or concrete like European cities. They were wood and paper, densely packed, built to withstand earthquakes, not fires. Industrial production wasn't concentrated in large factories that could be precisely targeted. It was dispersed through thousands of small workshops scattered throughout residential areas, cottage industries producing components that larger factories assembled. Precision bombing of individual factories missed the point. The target wasn't a building. It was an entire industrial ecosystem woven into the fabric of the cities themselves. LeMay also studied reports from test bombing at Dugway Proving Ground in Utah. Between May and September 1943, before the B-29 even entered combat, the Army Air Forces had conducted trials. They built a mock Japanese village, constructed with authentic materials and techniques, then bombed it with incendiary weapons. The results were unequivocal. Incendiary bombs were devastatingly effective against Japanese construction. Fire spread rapidly through the wooden structures, overwhelming any firefighting response. By late February 1945, Arnold and the 20th Air Force Headquarters issued a new directive. While aircraft industry targets remained primary, the directive emphasized large-scale incendiary attacks against Japanese cities. On February 25, 172 B-29 seconds conducted a daylight incendiary raid against Tokyo from high altitude. The attack destroyed nearly 28,000 buildings, the most destructive raid against Japan to that point. LeMay and his staff judged the results promising. But LeMay wasn't satisfied with promising. He wanted decisive. What happened next would be one of the most controversial decisions in military history. LeMay consulted his wing commanders, his intelligence officers, his operations staff. He reviewed every piece of data available. Then he made a decision that defied everything the B-29 was designed to do. He would abandon high-altitude bombing entirely. The bombers would attack at night, flying individually rather than in formation. They would come in low, between 5,000 and 9,000 feet, and he would strip most of the defensive armament from the bombers to carry more incendiary bombs. His staff was horrified. Japanese anti-aircraft guns could hit targets at those altitudes. Removing guns meant the bombers would be defenseless if intercepted by fighters. LeMay's intelligence officers predicted losses could reach 70%. Sending hundreds of bombers individually meant abandoning mutual defensive fire from formation flying. Everything about the plan violated doctrine, violated logic, violated the B-29's entire reason for existence. LeMay's chief of staff, Brigadier General August Kissner, expressed serious concerns. The wing commanders agreed with the tactical logic, but feared the human cost. Some of LeMay's own staff thought he was sending men to die. LeMay understood their fears. He told one aide, "If this doesn't work, if I'm sending these men to die, they'll string me up." But LeMay had done the analysis. Japanese night fighters were poorly coordinated. Their anti-aircraft guns lacked radar fire control, making them far less effective in darkness. Japanese air defenses were concentrated against high-altitude raids. Nobody expected low-altitude night attacks. The jet stream problem disappeared below 10,000 feet. The bombers could carry far more ordnance without guns and ammunition. Accuracy would improve at lower altitudes. And LeMay believed, based on the February 25th results, that incendiary bombs could create firestorms that would devastate Japanese industrial capacity. On March 7th, LeMay ordered training missions. Crews practiced low-altitude navigation using radar. Nobody told them why. LeMay didn't seek formal approval from Arnold for the new tactics. He notified Arnold's headquarters on March 8th, deliberately choosing a day he knew Arnold and Arnold's chief of staff would be absent. LeMay wanted to protect Arnold. If the mission failed catastrophically, Arnold could disown it. LeMay would take the blame alone. The target was selected, a 3x4 square mile area of eastern Tokyo called Shitamachi, densely populated, housing approximately 750,000 people. American intelligence had correctly identified it as containing a high concentration of the small workshops that formed Japan's dispersed industrial base. The date was set, March 9th, 1945. The afternoon of March 9th, 1945, Northfield, Guam. 334 B-29 Superfortresses sat on the coral runways, their bomb bays loaded not with the high explosive ordnance they'd carried on previous missions, but with something far more sinister. E-46 cluster bombs, each containing 38 M69 incendiary bomblets filled with napalm, jellied gasoline, that burned at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. M47 incendiary bombs, 100-pound packages of jellied gasoline and white phosphorus designed to ignite on impact and spray flaming gel in all directions. The crews gathered for briefing. When the mission details were revealed, shock rippled through the assembly. They would attack at night. They would fly individually, not in formation. Their altitude would range from 5,000 to 9,000 feet, well within range of Japanese anti-aircraft guns. Most shocking of all, the defensive guns had been removed from many aircraft. Only the tail gunner position remained armed. The rest of the turrets, the ammunition, even some of the gunners themselves, left behind to make room for more incendiary bombs. Each B-29 would carry approximately 7 tons of incendiaries. Robert Rodenhouse, a B-29 pilot, remembered the reaction. "We thought they could throw the kitchen sink up there and hit us." The crews believed Curtis LeMay was sending them to die. LeMay himself wasn't certain they were wrong. He spent the afternoon at Northfield with Brigadier General Kistner, watching the bombers prepare. He told McElway, a staff officer, "If I am sending these men to die, they will string me up for it." At 5:36 in the evening, Chamorro Standard Time, March 9th, the first B-29 lifted off. Brigadier General Thomas Power, commanding the 314th Bombardment Wing, personally led the mission. Behind him, at intervals measured in seconds, more superfortresses roared down the runway, dipped toward the ocean at the runway's end, then clawed for altitude. From Guam, from Saipan, from Tinian, the silver bombers climbed into the darkening Pacific sky. 334 aircraft, carrying 1,665 tons of incendiary bombs, all bound for Tokyo. Major Sam Bakshas, aircraft commander of a B-29 named Tall in the Saddle, was among the most experienced pilots in the command. At 34, he was older than most crew members. 6 feet 1, nearly 200 pounds, from Fergus County, Montana. His flight engineer, Second Lieutenant Leland Fishback, and co-pilot Major Jack Muster formed a crew at the top of their game. Tall in the Saddle's 4 Wright R3350 engines, temperamental beasts that had plagued B-29 operations since the beginning, were purring smoothly, maintained lovingly by dedicated ground crews. The bomber's natural metal skin gleamed in the fading light. Not a scratch marred its surface. It was 6:05 in the evening, March 9th, 1945. The flight to Tokyo took approximately 6 hours. The bombers flew individually, navigating by radar across the dark Pacific. No formation assembly, no rendezvous points, each crew alone with their aircraft and their mission. As they approached the Japanese coast, pilots and navigators watched for the pathfinders, the lead aircraft assigned to mark the target with flaming X patterns that subsequent waves would use as aiming points. Just after midnight, March 10th, Tokyo time, the first Pathfinder B-29 seconds crossed the coastline. Below them, Tokyo slept. The city sprawled across the Kanto Plain, home to over 6 million people, the largest metropolitan area in Japan. Air raid sirens wailed. Most residents paid little attention. Air raid alerts had become routine. Some people filed dutifully into the streets. Many stayed in their homes, wood and paper structures that had sheltered families for generations, built with sophisticated techniques to flex during earthquakes, but never designed to resist fire. Tokyo's civil defense preparations were catastrophically inadequate. Only 8,000 firefighters served the entire city. They had 1,000 pieces of equipment, and exactly 3 firefighting extension ladders. 3. For a city of 6 million. The government had deliberately avoided constructing air raid shelters, fearing that acknowledging the need for shelters would damage morale by admitting Tokyo could be bombed. The Pathfinder aircraft dropped their incendiaries first, creating a massive flaming X across the target area. The fires burned brilliant orange against the black night, visible for miles. Then the main force arrived. 279 B-29 seconds reached the target area. Flying individually at altitudes between 5,000 and 9,000 feet, released their loads. E-46 cluster bombs broke open at 2,000 to 2,500 feet altitude, releasing 38 M69 bomblets per cluster. The bomblets punched through thin roofing material or landed on streets. 3 to 5 seconds after impact, they ignited, regurgitating jets of flaming napalm. M47 bombs exploded on contact, spraying jellied gasoline and white phosphorus. Within minutes, hundreds of individual fires burned across Shitamachi. Within the first hour, those individual fires began merging. The phenomenon that followed has been debated by historians. Some call it a firestorm, a specific meteorological event where fires generate their own weather system, creating hurricane-force winds that feed fresh oxygen into the flames. Others note that natural winds that night, gusting at 17 to 28 miles per hour, prevented true firestorm conditions. The distinction is academic. What happened in Tokyo that night exceeded human comprehension regardless of technical classification. The fires spread with terrifying speed through the densely packed wooden structures. The wind, whether natural or fire-generated, turned the flames into a racing inferno that moved faster than people could run. Temperatures in the fire zone exceeded 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The air itself became lethal. People fleeing the flames found themselves breathing superheated gases that seared their lungs. Canals and water reservoirs that residents fled to for safety became boiling cauldrons. Those who jumped into the water cooked. Those who stayed on land burned. 15.8 square miles of central Tokyo transformed into a sea of flame. The B-29 crews, flying overhead, watched in horror at what they had unleashed. Richard Baylor of the 9th Bombardment Group reported he could almost read a paper in the cockpit from the light of the fires below. Crews at the tail end of the bomber stream, arriving nearly 2 hours after the first aircraft, reported that the stench of burned human flesh permeated their aircraft even at altitude. The updrafts from the fires created turbulence so violent that bombers thousands of feet above were tossed like toys. Some crews reported being caught in thermal columns that lifted their aircraft hundreds of feet in seconds. The Japanese firefighting response collapsed within the first hour. Equipment was destroyed. Water mains ruptured. The few firefighters available could do nothing but watch as their city burned. Residents attempting to fight fires with bucket brigades and neighborhood fire suppression equipment found themselves overwhelmed within minutes. The fire consumed everything: houses, shops, factories, schools, temples, hospitals. By dawn, 16 square miles of the most densely populated area of Tokyo had ceased to exist. Aerial reconnaissance photos taken March 10th showed nothing but ash and rubble where neighborhoods had stood hours before. The human toll remains disputed. Official American estimates from the United States Strategic Bombing Survey placed deaths at approximately 100,000. Japanese estimates often exceeded that number. Most victims were civilians: women, children, elderly, workers. The fires made no distinction. Over 1 million people lost their homes. American losses numbered 14 B-29 seconds, less than 5% of the attacking force. Some fell to anti-aircraft fire, some to mechanical failure. Some were caught by the massive updrafts and torn apart. 90 airmen went missing. LeMay's gamble on Japanese night defenses being inadequate proved correct. His intelligence officer's prediction of 70% losses proved spectacularly wrong. The mission succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, including LeMay's own. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. When news of the raid reached General Arnold in Washington, he sent LeMay a congratulatory message. "This mission shows your crews have the guts for anything." LeMay had proven the B-29 could be decisive, but he had proven it by abandoning everything the B-29 was designed to do. High altitude became low altitude. Precision bombing became area bombing. Daylight became darkness. Defense became offense. The moral calculus shifted fundamentally. The doctrine of precision bombing had promised to destroy an enemy's war-making capacity while minimizing civilian casualties. LeMay's tactics deliberately targeted urban areas where civilians lived alongside the dispersed industrial base. The distinction between military target and civilian neighborhood evaporated when the target was an entire city. LeMay himself understood the implications. Years later, he would be quoted saying, "Killing Japanese didn't bother me very much at that time. I suppose if I had lost the war, I would have been tried as a war criminal. Fortunately, we were on the winning side." This wasn't an admission of remorse. It was LeMay's understanding of political reality. Victory defines morality. The victors write the rules about what constitutes a war crime and what constitutes legitimate warfare. LeMay believed, genuinely, that his tactics saved lives. If the firebombing campaign forced Japanese surrender without an invasion, the alternative was Operation Downfall, the planned amphibious assault on the Japanese home islands. Estimates for American casualties in that invasion ranged from hundreds of thousands to over 1 million. Japanese casualties, military and civilian, would have been even higher. The calculus was brutal but clear. Kill 100,000 in Tokyo to potentially save 1 million in an invasion. The March 10th raid was not the end, it was the beginning. Nagoya was hit on March 11th to 12th, 8 square miles destroyed. Osaka on March 13th to 14th, 8 square miles destroyed. Kobe on March 16th to 17th, 3 square miles destroyed. Nagoya again on March 19th to 20th, 3 more square miles destroyed. The campaign continued relentlessly. LeMay had proven the tactics worked. He had no intention of stopping. Between March and August 1945, 66 Japanese cities were systematically firebombed. 61% of all bombs dropped by B-29 seconds on Japan were incendiaries. Approximately 96,480 tons of incendiary bombs fell on Japanese cities. The strategic results were exactly what LeMay predicted. Japan's dispersed industrial capacity, the thousands of small workshops producing components for war industries, was obliterated. Aircraft production collapsed. By April, the Mitsubishi aircraft engine complex at Nagoya was 90% destroyed. By mid-April, the Nakajima factory at Musashino, destroyed. Japanese aircraft engine production essentially ceased, but the campaign accomplished more than destroying factories. It destroyed morale. It destroyed the population's will to continue. By early summer 1945, Japanese cities were being crossed off target lists as not worth revisiting. There was nothing left to bomb. Yet the Japanese government refused to surrender. The military leadership clung to the belief that Japan could inflict such casualties in an invasion that America would negotiate a conditional peace rather than pay the price for total victory. Into this context came 2 more B-29 missions that would end the war. Special B-29 Seconds, modified extensively, designated Silverplate, stripped of all armament except tail guns, modified bomb bays, specially trained crews. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 named Enola Gay, piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, dropped a single atomic bomb on Hiroshima. On August 9th, another Silverplate B-29 named Boxcar dropped a second atomic bomb on Nagasaki. These 2 missions killed between 150,000 and 240,000 people, roughly equivalent to the casualties from the March 10th Tokyo firebombing. But they introduced a new terror, a single bomb, a single aircraft, instant annihilation. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. The strategic bombing campaign that LeMay directed between March and August may have killed over 500,000 Japanese civilians. Official estimates vary widely. What's undisputed is that by August, Japan's cities lay in ruins. 40% of the built-up areas of 66 cities were destroyed. 5 million people were homeless. The war industries that had sustained Japan's military were shattered. Some historians argue the atomic bombs get disproportionate credit for ending the war. They point out that Japan was already devastated by conventional firebombing. 2 more destroyed cities, regardless of how they were destroyed, simply confirmed what Japanese leadership already knew. Continued resistance was futile. Others argue the atomic bomb's psychological impact was decisive precisely because it represented unlimited destruction. If America could destroy entire cities with single bombs, no defense was possible. Surrender was the only option. The truth likely combines both factors. The firebombing campaign destroyed Japan's capacity to fight. The atomic bombs destroyed Japan's will to fight. Together, they made invasion unnecessary. LeMay's prediction proved correct. The B-29, using tactics completely different from those it was designed for, could force surrender without ground invasion, but the cost in moral certainty was profound. The doctrine of precision bombing had offered a vision of warfare that could be both effective and humane. LeMay's tactics proved that vision was an illusion. Modern industrial war could not separate military targets from civilian populations when the enemy's industry was woven into civilian neighborhoods. The choice became brutal pragmatism. Destroy everything to end the war quickly, or pursue moral purity while prolonging suffering. American public opinion during the war overwhelmingly supported the firebombing campaign. Few concerns were raised about the morality of burning Japanese cities. The enemy had attacked Pearl Harbor. The enemy fought with fanatical determination. The enemy refused to surrender despite certain defeat. Whatever was necessary to end the war and bring American soldiers home was justified. After the war, as the scope of civilian casualties became known, the moral debate intensified. Was the firebombing of Japanese cities a legitimate act of war or a war crime? Historians still argue. Some point out that Japan's own atrocities in China, Korea, the Philippines, and throughout Asia killed millions. Japan showed no mercy to conquered populations. Why should Japan receive mercy it never granted others? Others argue that atrocities committed by one side do not justify atrocities by the other. Morality cannot be contingent on enemy behavior. Either deliberate mass killing of civilians is wrong, or the entire concept of war crimes is meaningless. The comparison to European bombing campaigns is instructive. The British Royal Air Force under Arthur Harris conducted area bombing of German cities, including the firebombing of Hamburg and Dresden. American bombing of Tokyo killed more people in a single night than Dresden. Yet Dresden remains more famous in popular memory as a symbol of bombing atrocity. Perhaps because Dresden was European. Perhaps because the victims were white. Perhaps because Japan's surrender makes the bombing seem more justified in retrospect. The B-29 itself became legendary. The aircraft that dropped the atomic bombs, Enola Gay and Bockscar, are preserved in museums. Enola Gay at the Smithsonian's Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center, Bockscar at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. They are presented as historic artifacts of the war's end, the aircraft that made invasion unnecessary. Less discussed are the thousands of B-29 sorties that preceded them, the conventional firebombing missions that killed hundreds of thousands and destroyed 66 cities. Those missions lack the dramatic singularity of the atomic bombings. They lack a single target, a single date, a single moment where everything changed. But they were equally decisive in ending the war. Curtis LeMay emerged from the war as one of America's most successful military commanders. He later led Strategic Air Command during the Cold War, building the nuclear bomber force that ensured Soviet deterrence. He became Air Force Chief of Staff. He remained controversial throughout his career, known for his willingness to advocate for extreme measures, for his gruff manner, for his unwavering belief that decisive force applied without hesitation saved lives in the long run. His legacy remains contested. To some, he was a brilliant tactician who did what was necessary to win. To others, he was a war criminal who escaped justice because he was on the winning side. LeMay himself seemed untroubled by the debate. He understood that war demanded choices that peacetime ethics couldn't comprehend. He made those choices and lived with them. The B-29 crews who flew those missions carried their own moral burdens. They had done their duty. They had followed orders. They had risked their lives over enemy territory. Many genuinely believed they were shortening the war and saving lives. American and Japanese. Some struggled afterward with what they had done. Most didn't discuss it. They came home, resumed civilian lives, and tried to forget the night skies over Japan lit by cities burning. The technical lessons learned from B-29 operations reshaped military aviation. The jet stream, once unknown, became fundamental to flight planning. Weather reconnaissance became standard. The limitations of high-altitude precision bombing against dispersed industrial targets were recognized. The effectiveness of incendiary weapons against urban areas was proven. These lessons informed Cold War strategic bombing doctrine. The development of nuclear weapons rendered much of it moot. Why firebomb a city when a single nuclear warhead could vaporize it? The moral questions never went away. They intensified. If burning Tokyo with conventional weapons killed 100,000, was that fundamentally different from killing 100,000 with a single atomic bomb? Was the method of killing what mattered, or the decision to target civilians? If targeting civilians was justified to end the war quickly, where were the limits? What acts of war were prohibited, and why? These questions remain unresolved. Modern international humanitarian law attempts to distinguish between legitimate military targets and civilian populations. The Geneva Conventions prohibit deliberate attacks on civilians, yet modern warfare continues to blur these lines. Precision weapons allow targeting of specific buildings, but enemy forces hide among civilians. Industries critical to war efforts operate in urban areas. The same moral dilemmas that faced LeMay in 1945 face military commanders today. The B-29 story is often told as a story of technological triumph. The most advanced bomber of World War II, the aircraft that could reach any target, that brought Japan to its knees. That narrative is incomplete. The real story is about adaptation. About discovering that the most expensive, most sophisticated weapons system in history could not do the job it was designed for. About abandoning doctrine, abandoning design specifications, abandoning the entire concept of precision warfare. About finding a way to win by doing the opposite of everything planned. The B-29 was designed to bomb from 30,000 feet above enemy defenses, using precision bomb sights to hit specific factories. Instead, it won the war by bombing from 5,000 feet, at night, with incendiaries, targeting entire urban areas. The aircraft succeeded despite its design, not because of it. That lesson echoes through military history. Doctrine is valuable until reality renders it obsolete. Technology is powerful until circumstances negate its advantages. Victory requires not rigid adherence to plans, but flexibility to adapt when plans fail. The jet stream forced that adaptation, an atmospheric phenomenon that nobody predicted, that rendered the B-29's primary capability useless. American response wasn't to build a better bomber or a better bomb site. It was to abandon altitude entirely. The problem wasn't solved through engineering, it was solved through reinvention. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. The morning of March 10, 1945, as dawn broke over Tokyo, 16 square miles of the city smoldered, 100,000 people lay dead. The B-29 crews returned to Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, their aircraft scorched from the heat below, their souls marked by what they had seen and done. LeMay watched them land. His gamble had succeeded. His career was saved. The B-29 program was vindicated, and the war moved one massive step closer to its end. The Americans never returned to bombing from 30,000 feet. They had learned what worked, and they never looked back. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.